Estás viendo El Coleccionador. Participamos de una charla con Walter Murch.
Buenas tardes, camaradas del cine. Es para mí una alegría estar hoy aquí hablando con ustedes. Y sería mi deseo continuar hablando en castellano, un idioma noble de gran poder, poesía y consistencia, pero el disco rígido del castellano en mi cabeza es todavía muy pequeño. And I have been in Buenos Aires since March, editing Francis Coppola's film Tetro. So actually this is the first time in all those months that I have been away from Buenos Aires. So Rosario is virgin territory for me. First, I'd just like to say a couple of words about editing, which of all the crafts of film is the one craft that is unique to cinema. I would think, in my own mind, I think of editing as divided into three parts. The first part is what I would call plumbing. So it's really to do with the managing the flow of the material once the film is shot, and how it is processed, and then how it's edited, and how it's fed to the sound department, and then how it all comes together at the mix, and how we do visual effects, and then finally the printing at the lab. Then there's another aspect to editing which is more similar to writing, and here's where the English word is more accurate, except that we are writing with a sequence of images and sounds over a period of time. And the editor, it's the duty of the editor to make suggestions like, well, maybe we don't need this scene, or perhaps this scene could find a home in a different location. Which leads to the third part, which is the performance aspect of it, which is to say a shot is running and the editor has to choose exactly where to make the cut and then exactly what shot to go to next. Because so much of what feels right has to do with the rhythm with which it is expressed, and that is ultimately the domain of the editor. The world that we are moving into is this world where there are computers everywhere, and the material of film itself is non-existent. I also take when I look at the material, I take very detailed notes about what it is that I'm looking at, and you can see these pieces of paper on the wall are the notes for one very large scene that was shot. As the film is being shot, I am editing it at the same time that the film is being shot. Each of these shapes that I make myself represents a scene of the film. And lastly, there's another tool that I use, which is that I take a representative photograph of every shot that the director takes, and I print these out so that as I'm editing, I'm surrounded by images from the film, and I can. This again allows me a view of the creative landscape and gives me a great freedom to work within that landscape.
Thanks, Angie. Angie's dead. My name is Tetro.
So I try to construct all of these systems. My notes and the photographs and the little colored squares are all attempts to get the film to speak to me in this strange new language. So there's a certain amount of handcrafted work that goes on, even though we are very digital. I have this little man here in silhouette in white paper to remind me of how big this screen will actually be when it's in the theater. Because the cinema audience, particularly when they are very involved in the film, is not looking at the screen. They are really, the screen has become a magic window, and they have, in their imagination, walked through that window, and they are living in the world that is being described. And this approach informs how you make decisions and what kind of decisions you make. 30 years, I guess, almost 30 years to working on Apocalypse Now. We were editing it in 1978, which was 30 years ago. And it was all analog. There was no digital anything at that time. But there was a tremendous, it was Francis Coppola, and he shot a tremendous amount of material for that. So there was 236 hours of material. There were 3 editors working simultaneously. Francis wanted to invent, and we did invent, a new sound format for the film, which has turned out now to be what we call the 5.1 sound form. And this is now the accepted normal sound format for most motion pictures. On top of that, the conditions under which the film were shot were such that there was no usable sound that was taken at the time of shooting. So all the voices and every single footstep and every explosion and every bit of wind and everything that you hear was recorded separately and then put into a final form in which everything holds together as a single soundtrack. And my approach was to think of the soundtrack as an orchestra. So I would build the soundtrack up but using each layer as I did it as reference for what I would do next. What I found when I went to do the final mix was that even though I had been very careful to balance all of those elements against each other, when I had everything up and I had each of those premixes coming into the board, and I had individual control of all 6 channels for each premix, I found that it all collapsed into a disappointing pile of sound. And it was at that point that I remembered something from a previous film I had worked on, THX 1138, which is that when groups of sounds are greater than 3, that the mind tends to group them together into a new single unity. So, for instance, if I had, in the case of that film THX, I had somebody walking down a corridor, each footstep had to be in sync. If I had 2 people walking down the corridor, still each footstep had to be in sync. But if I had 3 people walking down the corridor. None of the footsteps had to be in sync. So what does this have to do with mixing is that I thought, well, let me try, and as I mix this scene, I will only have three things happening at the same time. I will have the music and the explosions and the voices, perhaps. And then in the next instant, I will shave the music back and add in the helicopters. So that in the end, the mix of this sequence, which I'll now play for you, is a complex weaving of sounds. And it seems that those sounds, that all the sounds are there all the time, but in fact, it's a complicated juggling act where I'm really presenting you only with three fully realized parts of the orchestra at any one time. Which is that obviously the world is changing very fast, and the challenges, but also the opportunities that are out there right now are remarkable. All of you who are entering or thinking about working in motion pictures, it's a very precarious business, and you can never tell what's going to happen. But the opportunities in a global sense for having your work seen are much greater now than they were previously. So I would encourage you, words of encouragement. So I hope to see great filmmakers come from Rosario.
Estaba caminando por Cambridge y vi una remera de Tintín.
Me gustó Tolkien, fueron por las películas.
La ADL es una asociación de dibujantes, incluye a dibujantes no solamente de Rosario,